This is the story of the feline shadow killers. In the quiet suburb of Willow Glen, the Taylor family lived in an old cozy house with a white picket fence and a flower-filled garden. Inside the house, nestled on a soft cushion by the window, was an elderly tabby cat named Miss Ember. She wasn't always called Miss Ember, though. That started around the time she began to slow down. She had to admit she wasn't as active as she used to be. But she wore the Miss title with pride. She earned it. Miss Ember has three favorite spots to relax her sometimes achy bones. One is in the Taylor's bedroom. One is in the room with the box that spoke to you while flashing moving things for you to chase. And this one is in front of the window with all the sunlight. She has been with the Taylors for almost 19 years, witnessing the family's joys and sorrows, and had become the heart of their home. Recently, the Taylors decided to adopt a new kitten to bring some youthful energy into the house and ease the eventual heartbreak they knew would come when Miss Ember's time ran out. They named this new addition Jumper. He was a playful black kitten, full of life, always pouncing on imaginary prey and scampering through the house with youthful exuberance. Miss Ember, however, was less thrilled about this new presence. Her days of frolicking were behind her, and she preferred the calm and quiet. One rainy afternoon, while the family was away, Jumper darted across the living room floor, chasing a loose thread on the rug. Miss Ember watched from her favorite perch, a small, elevated spot near the window. As Jumper chased the thread, she knocked over a small vase on the side table. The vase wobbled, then fell, striking Miss Ember on the head. The impact was not severe, but it was enough to daze Miss Ember and send her into a world between reality and something else entirely. As she regained her senses, she noticed a change in the room. There was a foul odor in the air. "Oh no! Did Jumper cause me to have an accident on myself?" Miss Ember exclaimed. What would the Taylors think about her now? As long as she has been a part of this family, she has never, ever had any difficulty getting to the litter box in time. She checked her rear end, prepared to give it a clean-up lick. "Nope, nothing there," she said out loud with a sigh of relief. Her litter box record was still intact. Jumper was chasing her tail around and around as the bright sunlight illuminated the room, oblivious to the turmoil she had put Miss Ember in when she stopped abruptly. She sniffed the air for a second or two and then went back to playing. Miss Ember noticed the foul odor was very faint now, almost gone. Miss Ember wanted to give Jumper a paw across her face for what she had done. But that would require Miss Ember to leave her sunny spot. Jumper wasn't worth the energy it would take. But even though Jumper caused the vase to break, she wouldn't get yelled at about it. It seemed that little kitten could do no wrong in the Taylor's eyes. And right now, as Miss Ember watched Jumper playing, she agreed with them. A smile crept across Miss Ember's face. If the truth had to be told, Miss Ember enjoyed watching Jumper's antics and confided to herself that she was a bit jealous of Jumper's energy too. Miss Ember sighed heavily again. "Oh well, that damn kitten has gotten enough attention from me today. She's disturbed my sun ray catching time, and the sun is going down." She slowly eased back into her sleeping position. That's when Miss Ember's head began to throb. Something caught Miss Ember's attention as her eyes squinted from the pain. She noticed that shadows in the corner of the room seemed to stretch and move on their own, twisting into grotesque shapes that whispered and hissed as if trying to communicate. She looked down to see if Jumper was making that hissing sound, but Jumper was no longer in the room. Miss Ember was alone. At first, Miss Ember thought she was imagining things, a trick of her aging eyes. But as the day turned to night, the shadows grew darker, and their whispers became more insistent. The air grew heavy again with that foul odor and a sense of malice she had never experienced. It was like the shadows were alive, filled with hatred and malevolence. Miss Ember felt every hair start to bristle. Something wasn't right. Miss Ember watched the shadows slither across the walls, their shapes changing from familiar household objects to terrifying, otherworldly forms. They seemed to be probing the boundaries of the house, searching for weaknesses, a way in. Are they searching for the Taylors? Miss Ember asked herself while tilting her head to one side, listening for the answer. As the days passed, the shadows became bolder. They whispered hateful things, sowing seeds of discord and fear throughout the house. The The Taylors began to argue over the smallest of things. They even blamed Jumper for things Miss Ember knew the little kitten didn't do. Miss Ember could hear them urging her to hurt the family she loved, to let the darkness in. The Taylors didn't care about her. She was old, and the Taylors wanted to put her down out of her misery. Anyway, they had that little kitten now to take her place. The shadows would whisper. But Miss Ember resisted their taunting, clinging to her love for the Taylors and Jumper. She must protect them all. Finally, when she didn't obey, they did it themselves. The Taylors would wake up to bloody scratches on their arms and legs. They blamed Miss Ember and Jumper for the scratches and the awful odor that permeated the rooms. They banned them from sleeping in their bedroom altogether. When Miss Ember and Jumper meowed over and over to be let back in, the Taylors screamed a threat to them. "If you don't shut up, we'll take both of you to the animal shelter for good, and you won't be coming back." That was a chilling threat. Miss Ember flashed back to what the shadows had whispered to her earlier. Miss Ember knew she had to get rid of these shadows before the Taylors got rid of her and Jumper. Then, Jumper became a target too. One partly cloudy day, Miss Ember found Jumper lying in the middle of the room with teary eyes, licking a long, bloody gouge on her side. The sunlight that peeked through the clouds made the wound glisten. Miss Ember's eyes expanded in horror as she asked Jumper if one of the Taylors did this to her. Jumper replied, "No," in a barely audible voice. "Then who?" But Miss Ember's voice trailed off as she realized just what did. Jumper finally responded, "They did, Miss Ember." Her voice was becoming a little louder now. "The ones in the corner told me to roll my ball to them, and they would roll it back to me. I thought they wanted to play, so I did, but they kept my ball and wouldn't roll it back." Not realizing she was putting herself in danger, Jumper crawled underneath the big chair to get her toy back. "I got too close to one of them, and it grabbed me. I tried to fight back, but my claws went right through it. So I flipped over, dug my claws into the rug, and pulled myself out as fast as I could. When I reached the light, it hissed and let go, but not before its claw dug into me. I'm okay, though. I'll get it next time. Just watch," Jumper yelled, looking towards the big chair. Miss Ember's eyes searched the room's corners for the dark shadows, barely seeing them. Then Miss Ember realized, "Jumper, you can see the shadows too?" "Yeah," Jumper replied. "How long have you been seeing them?" Miss Ember asked with a shocked tone. Jumper answered, "Since I got here. I thought they were part of our family. I tried talking to them, but they would only hiss at me. They're not very friendly, they smell bad, and they try to get me to do things to hurt the Taylors and to..." "And what, Jumper?" Miss Ember asked. "And to hurt you too. I don't like them at all," Jumper roared. "I'll pay you back for this," Jumper shouted for the shadows to hear. "And I want my ball back too." Miss Ember started putting the puzzle pieces together, and her plan to protect her real family began to form. She joined Jumper in the middle of the sunlit room. As she prepared to show Jumper some affection by licking her wound, she leaned in close to one of Jumper's ears and, in a whisper, said to Jumper, "We have to bide our time, but we will pay them back for everything together." Just then, they both heard a low-sounding hiss mixed with a bone-chilling laugh as Jumper's ball rolled out from beneath the big chair. Jumper looked up at Miss Ember. Her lips curled in anger, her face was forming a scowl, and her eyes were slits you could barely see. "Jumper," she said in a low voice, "they're going to regret that." But time was running out. The Taylors were still at each other's throats. The bickering was so bad that they started forgetting to feed their once-beloved cats. They even kicked at them or chased them out of the rooms. As things worsened, Jumper quizzed Miss Ember about the shadows. "Why did my claws go through them? Why couldn't I hurt them like they hurt me? Why, Miss Ember? Why?" Jumper's questions didn't fall on deaf ears. Miss Ember smiled. "Jumper, all your questions will be answered when the time is right." The shadows were gaining strength as they gorged off the Taylors' constant arguing and mistreatment of Miss Ember and Jumper. Becoming weaker with each passing day from not being fed much, Miss Ember walked slowly into the once bright room that used to warm her sleeping body. In the past 3 days, no sun had warmed the little house her family called home, not outside or inside. Jumper stopped playing and running through the house. She feared it would bring down the raft of the Taylors. In the meantime, Miss Ember stayed glued on and off throughout the day to the room with the noisy box. Her ears swiveled back and forth as she finally heard what she needed to hatch her plan. Then, on the fourth day, the Taylors seemed to be in a better mood. Instead of arguing, they were laughing with each other. Mrs. Taylor went to each room, pulled back the drapes, and opened the windows as wide as they would go. She felt giddy, like a little girl, until she came to one room. Mrs. Taylor stood outside the half-open door, but decided not to go in. "I'll air out this room later," she said. With that, Mrs. Taylor turned swiftly walked into the kitchen. She was unaware that Miss Ember was following her from room to room. Once in the kitchen, Mrs. Taylor called to her cats. She fed Miss Ember and Jumper a whole can of tuna each for breakfast. Then she watched while her cats gobbled it up. "They act like they haven't been fed for days," Mrs. Taylor said, laughing out loud while looking at her smiling husband. Mr. Taylor grabbed his wife's hand and said with excitement, "Come on, let's go for a walk by the lake. We can get breakfast while we're out." "Okay, sure, why not?" Mrs. Taylor responded. On her way out, as she closed the front door, Mrs. Taylor yelled back at Miss Ember and Jumper, "Take care of our home until we get back. Love ya." Miss Ember turned to Jumper and said, "Now it's our turn. Are you ready?" Standing at attention and saluting like a little soldier, Jumper replied, "Yep, I'm ready." Jumper's mind returned to her talk with Miss Ember earlier that morning. Miss Ember explained why the darkness lurked in the shadows. The shadows are miserable, evil things that hate anyone who shows love to one another. Miss Ember told Jumper her plan and how they would get rid of the shadows together for good. Miss Ember entered the same room where the shadow had grabbed Jumper. Jumper was right behind her, rolling her ball like a soccer player. This is the same room Mrs. Taylor stood in front of and decided not to enter. When Jumper cleared the door with her ball, Miss Ember pushed it closed with one paw swipe. Jumper was alarmed at the sound and backed up into Miss Ember. Miss Ember said, "Don't worry. I got your back." Jumper regained her courage after hearing those words and feeling the warmth of Miss Luna's fur. The darkness swallowed them as the awful foul odor seeped into the room. The only light came from the slit between the closed drapes that hung on the window. The showdown was about to begin. "Ready?" Miss Ember asked Jumper. "Ready, Miss Ember," Jumper answered back. The shadows listened to the exchange between Miss Ember and Jumper as they coalesced into a single towering figure. It was a grotesque parody of a cat with long, sharp claws and glowing red eyes that burned with hatred. Miss Ember and Jumper could barely see the outline of the shadow as it approached, but they could see the glowing red eyes and feel the evil it emitted. Their hearts pounded with fear, but they stood their ground. "When will the Taylors be back, little kitties?" the shadow hissed using a sinister voice. "Don't worry about them. Worry about us," Miss Ember growled, her voice more robust than expected. The shadow creature laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the room. "You are old and weak, little cat. You and your army of one cannot stop us, and soon both of you will be dead." That was it. Summoning every ounce of strength, Miss Ember leaped at the creature, her claws outstretched. The creature's form dissipated upon contact, but the invisible impact sent Miss Ember sprawling across the floor, slamming her left side into the wall. The shadow felt nothing. It seemed to drain her instead. Miss Ember was surprised at how fast she became exhausted, but she slowly got up and lunged at the shadow repeatedly. She wanted all its attention on her. She couldn't give up. As the shadows continued their assault, Miss Ember winced from the pain of their claws as they made contact with her. She found enough strength to keep them occupied and focused on her. When Miss Ember finally found her strength waning, she yelled as loud as she could, "Now, Jumper, now!" as she collapsed near the door. Hearing Miss Ember's signal, Jumper started running around like she was chasing her tail. She became a feline wind-up toy. With every turn around the room, she built up speed. You could feel the wind pick up from the little dynamo she became. Jumper transformed herself into a little, powerful tornado. The shadow's attention shifted to Jumper. It lunged at Jumper repeatedly, claws slicing through the spot Jumper had just left. It hissed in anger as it became dizzy. Jumper was just too fast for it. Jumper's speed and agility let loose as she propelled herself through the air and through the grotesque shadow as it stood before the window. Jumper landed on the closed drapes with a thud hitting the window. She dug her tiny, sharp claws into the drapes and pulled with such force that they fell to the floor, partly covering up Miss Ember's favorite sleeping spot, and again breaking the replacement vase Mrs. Taylor had bought. The bright sunlight caught the shadow between the red, glowing eyes and then wrapped around its body like a coat. The shadow screamed so loud it hurt Jumper's ears. Then it tried to seek shelter away from the sun in the corners of the now bright room, but there was none to be found. It finally slumped in the middle of the room, still screaming and twisting in pain as its body started to disintegrate. Miss Ember slowly limped over to where the shadow lay and looked down on it with glaring eyes. Then she said, "Now, I'm going to show you what a weak old cat can do." She gathered what strength she had left and extended her sharp claws, tearing into the disintegrating shadow of evil with pure joy. Her claws flashed like lightning in the sunlight, throwing clumps of shadow into the air to disappear in the bright sunlight. The shadow screamed and hissed in pain with every slashing motion. When Miss Ember was through with her reign of vengeance, the only thing left of the shadow was one red eye, still glowing with hatred. The last thing the shadow saw was a ball rolling towards it. The ball hit it squarely in its one remaining red eye. Jumper came closer as a small cloud of what looked like dust rose from where the shadow's eye used to be and disappeared. Nothing remained of the shadow, not even the foul odor. The room looked and smelled clean and fresh. "I told you I'd pay you back?" Jumper whispered to the used-to-be shadow. "And you did," Miss Ember said. "You did." Miss Ember turned to Jumper with a stern look and told her, "Remember this moment. I won't always be around, you know. It's important to face your fears, stand firm, and use the love and loyalty you felt today for the Taylors as a shield against the darkness of tomorrow." Jumper, standing at attention like a little soldier again, replied, "Yes, Ember," and then started chasing her ball again. "Hey, that's Miss Ember to you. Oh, and Jumper, I'm not taking the blame for the drapes on the floor or for that broken vase, no matter how cute the Taylors think you are." They both burst out in laughter. Today, Miss Ember and Jumper sealed a bond that will never be broken, even in death. Thanks for joining me, but before you go, take advantage of my next haunting tale of cat ingenuity. Subscribe now, or you may become the next casualty. You've been warned.